Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. In this video we will talk about the new classical theory of interest rate, also called as the Lonable funds theory of interest rate. This theory was propounded by the Wicksell. In the previous video we have already discussed about the classical theory of interest rate, according to which the equilibrium interest rate is determined where the demand and supply of savings and investment are equal. Basically, this theory is an improvement over the classical theory of interest rate in such a way that the classical theory of interest rate considers only the real factors of savings and investment. But this theory, or we can say that the new classical theory of interest rate, besides considering the real factors of savings and investment, takes into account the monetary factors of savings and investment in the determination of rate of interest. According to the new classical theory of interest rate, equilibrium interest rate is determined where the supply and demand for the loanable funds, or we can say that where the demand for the loanable funds or supply for the loanable funds are equal. At that point, equilibrium interest rate is determined. So before we go further, or before we go in the explanation of the theory, let us have a look on some assumptions of the theory. And the assumption of the theory are as follows: that the first assumption of the theory is that there must be the perfect competition in the market. Means perfect competition situation must be there in the economy. Second is that monetary factors are also there in the or we can say that monetary factors have to be considered in the determination of interest rate. Full employment situation must be prevail in the economy and income remains constant, or we can say that there is not any change in the income, right? So as we know, the definition of the Lonable fund theory or new classical theory of interest rate, according to which that the equilibrium interest rate is determined where the demand for the loanable fund and the supply for the loanable funds are equal, right? So this means that there are two segments in the theory. First is the demand for the loanable funds and the other one is the supply for the loanable funds. And in the demand for the loanable funds, there are two components. One is the investment demand and other one is the holding money demand, right? We demand only for the two reasons, either to investment or either to hold the money. These are the two components for the demand for the loanable funds. And on the supply sides, there are three components, right? One is the savings, other one is the disk holdings, and the other one is the money supply, right? So on the demand side there are two components and on the supply side there are three components. If we see that both these components, either the investment or either the holding of money, they are in the indirect or they are in the declining function of the rate of interest, means they have a indirect relationship with the rate of interest. Means to say that at higher rate of interest we invest less and vice versa, and at lower rate of interest we hold higher amount of money and vice versa. On the other hand, in case of supply for the loanable funds, all the three components of supply for the loanable funds are in the positive function or are in the increasing function of rate of interest. Means at higher rate of interest we save higher amount of money, at higher rate of interest we dishold higher amount of money, and at higher rate of interest we supply higher amount of money and vice versa, right? If we plot the graph for the investment and holding, for the investment and holding money, here we measure investment and here we measure rate of interest. So the demand curve or the demand for the investment curve must be declining, right? Because at higher rate of interest we invest lesser amount, at lower rate of interest we invest higher amount. And in the same way, here we measure holding money and here we measure rate of interest. So the demand curve, demand for the holding money curve is also in the declining shape. Means at higher rate of interest we hold lesser amount of money, and at lower rate of interest we hold higher amount of money, right? So if we combine both these curves, because if both the components of demand for the loanable funds are in the declining function of rate of interest, so thus automatically the demand for the loanable funds are also in the declining function of rate of interest. Here we measure units of capital, and here we measure rate of interest. So the demand for the loanable fund must be like this. Demand for the loanable fund, because it is the aggregate demand curve of both the components of investment and holding money, right? So now come to the supply for the loanable side. If we plot the graph for all the three components of the supply for the loanable funds, then the curve for all the three components are in here we measure savings, and here rate of interest, here we measure this holding of money, and here we measure money supply, right? At higher rate of interest we supply more, and at lower rate of interest we supply lesser amount of money. If we join these 2 points, then the supply curve or the savings curve is of the increasing nature. In the same way, this holding is also increases with the increase in the rate of interest. At lower rate of interest we dishold lesser amount of money. As the interest rate increases, this holding is also increases, right? In the same way, the money supply curve is also in the upward nature, right? Means at lower rate of interest we supply lesser amount of money. As the interest rate increases, supply of money also increases, right? Just because all the three components for the supply of the loanable funds are in the nature of increasing function with rate of interest, thus automatically the supply for the loanable funds is also in the nature of increasing with the rate of interest. Here we measure units of capital, and here we measure rate of interest. So the supply for the loanable funds is something like this, right? Because at lower rate of interest we supply lesser amount of funds as loan, and at higher rate of interest we supply higher amount of funds as capital. And to determine the equilibrium rate of interest, or to determine the equilibrium interest rate, what we do, we have to find out that point where the demand for the loanable funds and supply for the loanable funds are equal to each other. And for that we have to combine both the curves, demand for the loanable funds and supply for the loanable funds, in a single diagram, right? So if we plot a diagram, or if you plot a graph between the demand and supply for the loanable funds, here we measure unit of capital, and here we measure rate of interest. Demand curve or demand for the loanable fund is of declining nature with rate of interest, and supply for the loanable funds is of increasing nature with rate of interest, and these two curves intersect at the point E. So that means E is the, or at E point the equilibrium rate of interest is determined. Here we measure rate of interest. So at the point where the demand for the loanable fund and supply for the loanable funds are intersect or equal to each other, at that point we have the equilibrium interest rate. So this is how the neoclassical theory of interest rate explain the equilibrium interest rate. in this theory, we are not focusing only on the real factors of savings and investment, but we also considers the monetary factors as holding of money and money supply in the determination of interest rate. Thank you very much.